Following all the events are my guests in the studio, Selim Atalay, he's a journalist and commentator for 24 TV in Istanbul, and Klaus Jurgens, who is a media and political analyst. I'm also joined by my colleague Yusuf Aram, TRT World's Turkey analyst in Istanbul. To my studio guests, I want to get both of your reaction to Erdogan's speech tonight, because you're sitting here with me listening to it. And Klaus, I want to start with you. What are your thoughts on what Erdogan had to say? What message was he sending to the crowd and also people perhaps watching at home?
Well, I think first of all, he came across as a president, not a party politician. He addressed the entire nation, which I think is something very interesting shortly after the elections. So he drew this fine line of being a politician and a statesman. He is both, and he is the statesman today. And absolutely amazing. He was almost charming. But I don't talk from a party political perspective. I just talk, if I would know nothing about Turkey and I would have listened to him today, I would have understood that this man has a message. Something terrible happened 2 years ago. He alone could not set it right. The entire nation set it right. But he is proud to serve the nation. And I think this is nothing more, nothing less than, from a political scientist perspective, I would expect from a modern democratic leader. You want to serve your nation. You want not to run it or to rule it, but you are part of it. Proud to be part of that nation, he said, which is simply remarkable. A second point, if I may say, I think even if we do remember 2 years ago, reading a little bit between the lines, what a journalist sometimes is allowed to do, I think President Erdogan was looking forward. He is probably already looking forward to the year 2023, the wider picture of what kind of nation he would, and his team and his people would like to deliver as a legacy for the generations to come, which is all about democracy, which is all about freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, everything. And the people assembled tonight. And Selim just said we had these pictures from, I shouldn't comment about another event while we talk about this, but yes, indeed. Someone is celebrating football, but then you can argue, are they celebrating football? You know, it all depends how people celebrate. Here in Turkey today, people came together to remember and to celebrate in a fantastic, orderly way without anyone giving directions, because the people felt like this. Now, people from Europe, I hope they would be watching and they could see this is a model exercise of how to turn a sad, dramatic event into something to build the future on it. And I think this is, you asked what I made out of Erdogan's speech. I think the people will remember this day as looking ahead, not forgetting the past. I said, always remember was one word he said, but then at the same time, we will never forget July the 15th. Every year there will be celebrations, remembrance days. It's very difficult to put this into words, but it's not a celebration. It is a celebration of democracy, but you remember those who lost their lives and the injured and everything. And then you must make sure that those who actually staged this coup, and if there's any soft environment anywhere left, that this has to be democratically, as Turkey has done, taken care of. And then, yes, I think the era of coups could indeed be over. We mentioned this once or twice. Now, just looking ahead, if I may, half a minute, when I was listening to President Erdogan's speech on June the 24th, he said tutelage has been basically erased. It's over for good. By tutelage, he didn't only mean tutelage from overly militaristic tendencies in society. He meant tutelage by anyone who wants to belittle the Turkish people, tell them what to do, lecture them, either from within or from the outside. And we may come back to this perhaps later. Was there a foreign hand in all of this July 15, 16 so heinous business? Now, by erasing the risk of tutelage, the risk of ever having again another military intervention or militarily looking inspired terrorist intervention, hopefully has been reduced to zero. So I think it was a great speech, a statesman speech, much more than a party politician's speech.
And also, besides tutelage, he mentions bureaucratic oligarchy. He calls it bureaucratic oligarchy has been broken, and bureaucracy involves both the civilian side and the military side, naturally. So he calls them bureaucratic oligarchy, and which is, yes, we can admit that it's broken.
I do want to get more of your thoughts, but first I want to bring in my colleague Yusuf Aram, who is live for us in Istanbul. Yusuf, what does this day mean for the people of Turkey? We saw this huge crowd come out in Istanbul to see the Turkish president talk, waiting for hours to hear him talk. People with flags, almost a rock concert feel out there. Talk to us about just really what this means for the Turkish people to commemorate this day.
Well, when you look at Turkish history, you see many coups that have happened. There were many undemocratic takeovers by use of force. Now, on the night of July 15, 2016, an organization, a shadow government, a cult, tried to take over the Turkish government. They tried to seize power with undemocratic means. But the Turkish people said, no, we are tired of this cycle going on, and they stopped it. They went out on the streets. They used their bodies as shields against these tanks. When we look back 20, 30 years later on what happened the night of July 15th, we'll be able to understand exactly how historic it was. It's very important. It's going to be a very important moment in history, not just in Turkey, in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. It's a turning point. It's when people said enough. We are here for democracy. We are here for our freedoms. I liken what happened on July 15th, I find it very, very similar, actually, with what happened in North Africa and the Middle East during the Arab Spring. Many of these countries said no to dictatorship. And what happened in Turkey that night is a terrorist dictator tried to seize power. And the Turkish people said no. They went out and they stopped it. So they have reason to be proud of what went on that night. As President Erdogan said, I'm both sad and I'm both proud. Of course, it's a very, very sad moment. Over 250 people died. But for the history of the country and going forward, it's a very, very important moment. And hopefully Turkey will be able to build on what happened that night. Hopefully with the new presidential system and the new powers that President Erdogan has, he's going to be able to take the country forward and make it stronger.
Let me get back to my studio guests, and Selim Atalay, you were talking about your thoughts from hearing the Turkish president speak. He talked a lot about the citizens who came out into the street to fight this coup attempt off. Talk to us a little bit about some of that, and also really how did the people of Turkey know to go out and fight back against this?
The last point, actually, we said they actually took the streets after the call by President Erdogan, which was via FaceTime application broadcast on live TV. And then, but before that, hours before that, in the middle of the night, mosques started, through their loudspeakers, imams at the mosques started reciting prayers. Which is the most extraordinary thing, because that was not a regular prayer hour, just in the dead of the night, and that actually was also the spiritual power of the July 15th, the night of the resistance, that just initially gave the message to the people that something very, very bad and very, very extraordinary is happening, and the mosque loudspeakers they were just reciting Quranic verses, but it was an extraordinary sign that was time of an extraordinary moment, and something needs to be done. That was also partly the call. I don't think loudspeakers were used to invite people out in the streets, but just that was the spiritual aspect of it, which was very significant. Also, from the speech, he said, "This is the victory of whole 81 million Turkish nation," which means he just embraced the whole nation just commemorating the July 15th and the victory. He called the victory as the victory for democracy. He said this is the victory also for the oppressed of the world, which he also internationalized the victory in terms of, he mentioned the geographies. He said people were with us from Somalia to Sanjak to Pakistan. Turkestan, he mentioned, he drew a wide geography as an example. And also he said the coup chapters have been shut down permanently. So that was the end of it. A new era, no more coups in Turkey. And also, it was symbolic and it was quite interesting. He said, we also saw that night who is our friend and who is not. Okay. And he tacitly blamed the ones who kept silent and strong messages.
All right. Selim Atalay and Klaus Jurgens, thank you both for joining me today. This is TRT World and our special coverage of the second anniversary of the attempted coup, a defining moment in Turkey's history. We'll have more for you after this. Stay with us.
Money, a commodity used for economic exchange, from person to person, country to country, whether it's coins, notes, bonds, or cryptocurrencies. It's called trade, and wherever there's money, there's a story. Money Talks on TRT World.
The Ebola outbreak was first reported in March.
10,000 people have died.
The Ebola virus is still rife.
The virus has rapidly become one of the deadliest diseases in the world.
Imagine what it would be like to lose all the mountains in the world. Once it's gone, it's gone.
And we really have to start changing our behavior. Otherwise, this will be all water really soon.
Is just coming in to TRT World.
Our TRT news team are the first on the scene.
Hundreds of pages of evidence
for America's most wanted terrorists.
We're piecing together all the facts.
We've discovered more than we ever imagined.
In days, or even weeks. It's taken months upon months upon months upon months. No stone has been left unturned.
Information has been sourced from the darkest corners. The truth is coming to light. This is one story that will touch millions of people.
Check out the new TRTworld.com for all the latest news from around the world. Perfect for your laptop, phone or tablet. TRTworld.com.
Excited to see the next technological breakthrough.
We landed on Mars.
Everyone should have the right to an education.
Less talking, more action.
A cure for cancer
is an issue that is very close to all.
Plus de respect pour everyone, man and
Over my head is all I need. To end the war on terror.
Extinguishing family policy.
A better understanding of mental health.
To end the war on terror.
A revolution.
As U.S. President Donald Trump rebrands America's role in the world, disrupting decades of foreign policy norms, will a new U.S. alliance with Moscow bring an end to NATO and the international liberal order, or will Trump's affair with Russia achieve peace and stability? We take a closer look at what's next for regional and global security, and we examine the Kremlin's alleged interference in the U.S. election.
Bigger Than 5, The Russian Connection on TRT World.
Turks across the country mark the 2-year anniversary of the failed coup attempt. Hello and welcome to TRT World Live from Istanbul. I'm Rachel Rubel. Also ahead on the program, President Erdogan says July the 15th marks the rebirth of the country as he addresses a rally of hundreds of thousands on the Martyrs Bridge in Istanbul. July the 15th, a date that marks an important moment in the modern history of Turkey. On this day, 2 years ago, 250 people were killed during a failed military coup. More than 2,000 were injured. The people of Turkey played a critical role in the hours the military were on the streets and Air Force jets in the sky. Civilians confronted soldiers who were trying to overthrow the government. Coming out in the thousands, they stood in front of tanks and defied the armed forces. Events have been held across Turkey to commemorate the second anniversary. Earlier on Sunday, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had a lunch with some of the victims' families in Ankara before heading to a special event at the Martyrs Bridge in Istanbul, which was attended by hundreds of thousands.
On the night of July 15th, this bridge was the stage of great resistance. And I would like to call on our martyrs from this bridge. As the poet says, this is a real generation. They protected their honor as they always will. Today, we are both sad, but we're also very proud. On the one hand, 251 fellow countrymen were lost in one night, and we are sad about it. But on the other hand, we are proud that we displayed a great resistance, which was unique in the world. On the one hand, we are very sorrowful that we lost 16-year-old young citizens, but on the other hand, we're proud that we were able to save our country. Without a doubt, no victory is easy. Throughout our history, behind every victory that we achieved, there was a lot of sacrifice. There was strength. We see the same in Gallipoli in our War of Independence as well. As Muhammad Iqbal says, at the War of Independence, thousands of stars, thousands of brave men, thousands of martyrs were lost. The morning of 1923 was possible thanks to thousands of young men whose mothers sent to war. Our victory on July 15th was very similar. This victory was against the tanks, against the planes. It was thanks to the courage of our veterans and our martyrs. There was a lot of noise coming from weapons in that dark night, but the Turkish people were very brave and they resisted. They displayed the same spirit as in Gallipoli. Against the weapons of destruction of FETÖ terror group, they sometimes sacrifice their own lives or their own children, but they did not allow their country to be defiled.
Let's go now live to the Martyrs Bridge here in Istanbul, where TRT World's Alacan Ayanlar is live. He's been there all night as the commemoration events have taken place. Alacan, what more did the president have to say tonight?
Well, some important messages coming out from the Turkish leader on the day's last, largest and perhaps most meaningful event commemorating the second anniversary of that failed coup on July 15th, 2016. And it was held at the foot of the bridge, formerly known as the Bosphorus Bridge, but as you just referred, it was renamed the 15th of July Martyrs Bridge shortly after that fateful Friday evening. The Turkish president touched upon the importance of this day in terms of turning a new page in the country's democracy. He thanked everyone for coming out, participating, not only tonight, but also 2 years ago when they stood up in defiance against those terrorists. And that was sort of the main message of, one of the main messages in the president's speech, which lasted over 30 minutes, the importance of breaking the back of terrorist organizations like Fethullah Gülen, or FETÖ, the group that Turkey holds responsible for masterminding the failed coup attempt. Not only them, but also the PKK. He said that today would be a new page in the Turkish history. So there was a real sense of unity, and that really epitomized the feeling of the Turkish people here who were gathered in the hundreds of thousands. Rachel?
Alajan, you mentioned the size of that crowd, hundreds of thousands of people who've been out there for hours tonight to see the Turkish president speak. So what happens now? The president spoke. He spoke for about half an hour, as you said. So what happens after this event?
Well, like we said, it was the last event marking the second anniversary. The crowds have actually started to disperse, but crowds had started gathering here, well, 4 or 5 hours before the event was scheduled to begin. It was a sea of red and white all over. Turkish flags were being waved around, but the president's speech officially marked the end of the commemoration events, and we're actually seeing people sort of disperse. The bridge is still closed like it has been since 2 p.m. this afternoon. Most of the people are actually walking towards the Asian side of the bridge and sort of trying to catch public transport, which has been free all day, back to their homes.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alajan, it really is remarkable that this many people came out to this event tonight and have been there for hours. Talk to us a little bit about the reaction of the crowd before Erdogan showed up, during his speech, and then perhaps afterwards.
Well, I think that living in Istanbul, coming out in the streets today, when we were trying to come over here, we saw everybody out in the streets carrying their flags of red with the white crescent and star. And when we got here, there were already tens of thousands of people who were already here waiting. Music was playing, and when the event started shortly before 9 p.m. local, it started off with sort of a moment of silence, and then the singing of the national anthem, and the atmosphere was really building up in the minutes before the president's arrival up on the main stage, where he made a grand appearance. The 250 martyrs' names were called out one by one. That took about 20 minutes, and after each calling of the name, the tens of thousands of people who had gathered here said "Burada" in Turkish, or "here," basically meaning that while they may not be physically here, they were here in spirit. So it was an important, a very emotional sort of a couple hours for the people who had come in attendance.
Alajan Ayanlar, live for us in Istanbul. Really is a remarkable sight to see all those people out tonight and waving all those Turkish flags. Well, let's get some reaction now from Ankara, where TRT World's diplomatic correspondent Hassan Abdullah has been following events there. Hassan, talk us through the events of that night 2 years ago.
Well, Rachel, it all started not too far away from here. This is the Kızılay, which is the city centre here in Ankara. About a kilometre from here is the military general headquarters, and right across the road from there is the parliament. Now, at the military general headquarters, there was a shootout around 10 o'clock. And at that time, rumours started circulating that perhaps a coup attempt was underway. Around 11 o'clock, the then Prime Minister Binali Yildirim confirmed that a coup attempt was in fact underway. And at the very same time, or just a few minutes after he made that announcement, the then military chief, General Hulusi Akar, was captured by some of the coup soldiers, and he was taken to Akıncı Air Base, which was the command and control center of these coup plotters. Now, about an hour or so after that, we heard from President Erdogan, who called on the people to take to the streets, to head towards the airport, to defend their democracy. And people poured on the streets, people poured here around Kızılay, the city center. There were tanks rolling all over the streets. F-16 fighter jets were flying over, and they started targeting the parliament as well. Now, that's when we saw the parliamentarians head to the parliament, and even when the parliament was actually being bombed, the parliamentarians continued to talk at that time. I remember Bekir Bozdağ, who was the justice minister at the time, he was addressing the parliamentarians, and he said that we must stand firm, otherwise history would repeat itself. And he was talking about the military coups Turkey has witnessed. So here, 2 years later, what people are saying is that they feel that this just happened yesterday, it's all fresh in their memory, but they're happy, and they're saying that they have changed history. And we've heard from politicians here saying that the chapter of military coups in Turkey is finally over.
Hassan, you have quite a crowd behind you there. It sounds like there's a lot going on. What's happening right now in Ankara?
Well, we've heard from the speakers. We also have some singers around here who are singing, particularly related to the bravery of the people and the sacrifice they made. So we still have thousands of people. I can't give you a figure, but wherever we look, in all four directions, there is a sea of people who are very charged. And as I mentioned earlier, they feel a sense of achievement. The people we've spoken to, they're saying that they're happy that they played a positive role and they overcame any fear. And that way they're saying that they protected their democracy and they protected their elected government. Now, we've also asked people about some of the criticism Turkey faces. Some criticism, particularly from some Western countries, suggesting that the democratic values were somehow undermined. Now, the people here are saying that they feel their democracy has only strengthened after that. They refer to how the chapter of military coups has been closed, and they talk about the power of the people, how the people took to the streets and they made sure that no one would be able to topple their elected representatives.
All right, Hassan Abdullah live in Ankara. Hassan, thank you. Ediz Tianchen is in Washington, D.C. and is joined by political analyst Yenal Küçükur. Ediz.
Well, exactly. We're here today to witness an interesting development, because we've actually heard a statement from the State Department. Unlike last year, they've actually sent out a message of support, a message of condolences towards Turkey, the Turkish nation who's lost more than 250 lives on that tragic night 2 years ago. And also, the State Department defined that incident as an attack on Turkish democracy and also expressed its support to its strong NATO ally. But that kind of a statement only came from the administration, who's now in relatively better terms with President Erdogan and his government. But we haven't heard any similar reactions from the Congress coming. And to find out more about that, now I'm going to ask the question to Yenal Küçükur, who's following the Turkish-American relations quite closely. What have you heard from Congress so far, if anything?
Well, thank you for having me. We haven't heard anything from Congress. There was a statement from the State Department, as you indicated today, which to me was a very brief standard language that was used in there. But besides that, nothing came out of the Senate or from the House of Representatives, which to me is a concern at this point, because currently there's 136 members that are in the Congressional Turkey Caucus, and this is a caucus that represents the best interests of U.S.-Turkey relations. However, neither collectively nor individually, none of them came out and said anything about this coup attempt. And this is the second year, and there should be more information about that. I think there's a lot of resentment on the Hill. Yes, White House seems that U.S.-Turkey relations are sort of on a good term at this point, but I don't quite see that the change in the Senate or on the Hill, basically. And one thing I want to add, Senator Jean Shaheen and Senator Lindsey Graham were recently in Turkey, I think about 2 weeks ago. Senator Lindsey Graham indicated that the U.S.-Turkey relations are extremely important. Failure is not an option. But last time I checked this morning, there wasn't any statement from his Twitter account or in his website regarding to the coup attempt. So I think there's definitely either shortage of information out there or some sort of hesitation, political hesitation from the elected officials to make comments on this.
Interesting indeed. Despite a show of support and solidarity from the administration, still lack of response from the Congress. And we're seeing now, just moments ago on TV, we've had live pictures from a massive event, celebrating, or rather commemorating the second anniversary. It's obviously a landmark for the Turkish democracy. Now, how has the U.S. mainstream media coverage of these events so far?
That's a great question. I've been checking out all the media coverage today. If you look at New York Times, did not have anything published today, and Washington Post did not have any op-eds or any coverage, with the exception of the fact this full-page ad, which was published by the Turkish-American Steering Committee, it's a paid ad, basically informs about what happened 2 years ago in Turkey, the coup attempt, and what needs to be done to better the U.S.-Turkey relations. Now, to me, if you were to ask, there's still a lot of coverage of the Gülen movement in this country. If some of the audiences may remember, New York Times published an op-ed or some sort of coverage approximately 2-3 months ago about the Gülen movement, and basically they depicted the Gülen movement as the good guys and the Turkish government as the bad guys. That to me is telling that still there's a lot of, it's an uphill battle for Turkish-American, Turkish cause in this case, to explain what this Gülen movement is about, explain what happened in Turkey 2 years ago today, explain the importance of this major significance of this event, basically.
And it's very interesting to see that FETÖ has very deep business contacts. It still spends millions of dollars in the Congress, in its lobbying efforts, and it has dozens of schools across the nation. I mean, some of them are considered even good schools, but there's been recent publications alleging that this group essentially steals taxpayer money and meddles with some of the visas of their staff, bringing their own cult members from Turkey. I mean, despite all of this, am I making an overstatement to say that maybe the American institutions, officials, I mean, the public in general is still quite ill-informed?
That is correct. The general public, if we were to stop anyone here and ask them about the coup attempt in Turkey, I think they would still be ill-informed. And that's the general consensus here. And the media coverage here in the United States absolutely does not help. Now, there's some information out there. You mentioned about the Gülen movement's stronghold in this country, especially with the charter schools. And there's a particular documentary that was made by an American law attorney, basically. It's called Killing Ed. I think I would highly recommend to your audience, if they haven't heard about this, it's a comprehensive coverage of this Gülen movement's charter schools in this country and why American taxpayers should be concerned, because it's their money that is funding these schools. Secondly, there was a book that was recently published. It's called Turkey's July 15 Coup, What Happened and Why. This is the first comprehensive academic coverage of what took place 2 years ago in Turkey. And it's not, yes, it's edited by Hakan Yavuz and Bayram Balcı, but there are 12 scholars in this book, and they're not all Turkish. These are Turkish and Turkish-American and American scholars, and it's a comprehensive coverage. It's not by no means a propaganda of the Turkish government, because it's critical of the Turkish government in certain sections, but it does provide an academic coverage of what actually took place. So these kinds of information are extremely important in terms of educating elected officials as well as the public here in the United States.
Thank you very much. Yenal Küçüker there, who's an expert in Turkish-American relations, who's closely following the congressional affairs as well. Now, we understand that after 2 years on, even though the approach of the administration has changed slightly, with this year, as they published a statement of support and solidarity for the first time, there are still several circles, including the Congress itself, who is showing a lack of response rather to everything that's happening now. And you know, of course, that the extradition of Fethullah Gülen himself, the leader of the FETÖ organization, is still an ongoing process that is in the very early stages. We know that could take a very long time. It's a complicated process, but also many experts like Yenal Küçüker will tell you that the American public and its institutions and officials are still mostly ill-informed about exactly what happened in Turkey and the nature of that organization, including Fethullah Gülen's character itself. So essentially, I think all of these will also have an impact when it comes to that extradition process. As I said, it could take many years to come.
All right, Adiz Tianchen live in Washington, D.C. Adiz, thank you for that. On that night, 2 years ago, the entire country was affected, including this very media house. Soldiers stormed TRT World's Istanbul headquarters during that coup attempt. Abu Bakr al-Shamahi explains how it all unfolded.
It's a characteristic of coup attempts across the world. The forced takeover of media institutions by those backing the coup in an attempt to make sure that only their narrative gets on air. Now, on the night of the 15th of July, soldiers supporting the coup came into this building, TRT World, and other TRT buildings across the country. From TRT World studio, they didn't plan to actually air anything, but to ensure that the government didn't get their narrative on air themselves. At around 10:30 p.m, the soldiers smashed through these barriers, rifles at the ready, and forcibly entered the TRT World newsroom. They then ordered the dozens of journalists inside the building to leave.
And when it happened, we couldn't believe it. We find it very hard to believe, but it happened in front of our eyes, and you know, a lot of things goes through your mind. You're in between choosing whether to, you know, carry on the task as much as possible until the very end. But that end actually was very abrupt. They just started yelling off the main door, just evacuate the building, stop whatever you're doing.
Staff were ordered to leave their phones behind, line up outside, and then eventually to leave the premises. TRT World itself broadcast from our studios in London, and within a few hours, the coup had failed and the soldiers themselves were arrested. All that they left behind was the trucks that they came in.
And here we are in these very studios at TRT World. Following all of these events are my guests in the studio, Selim Atalay, who is a journalist and commentator for 24 TV in Istanbul, and Klaus Jurgens, who is a media and political analyst. I'm also joined by Yusuf Aram, TRT World Turkey analyst in Istanbul. I want to start with my guests in the studio, and Klaus, if I can start with you. Talk to us a little bit about the significance of the state in Turkey. We saw the huge crowds in Ankara and here in Istanbul, Turkish president speaking to all the people who came out today. What is the significance of the state?
I think the significance of the day is that we heard it now a couple of times, that everyone hopes for that the era of coups, if we ever can call it like this, is finally over for good. That, as it was said before, no one can take away Turkey from its people. So the significance of today cannot be underestimated. It shows to the Turkish people that this country is yours, and as the president said himself, that he is there basically to serve. But there is, of course, if I may ship this in, there is, of course, a wider international dimension. We heard now from the United States. There is, of course, Europe. And it was very, very sad to see that afterwards, when the European Commission declared we were unfortunately far away on a different trip to somewhere, we couldn't follow the events on the night. And then, with all my respect to the EU Commission, then you must be frank sometimes. Then I said I was able to follow the events, and everyone who has an interest into modern Turkey was able to follow the events, or would have been alerted minutes later, if not hours later, about what was going on. And then a statement could have been issued. Help perhaps could have been sent, God knows what, but something could have been done. So the non-reaction by many in Europe is shell-shocking and very sad to see. I'm not saying any one of those had a hand in it, of course not. But not doing nothing and not showing support to what you would call an ally and friend is very, very, very disturbing. So this day will not only show to the Turks themselves what a proud nation it is, hopefully that the coup era is over for good, but it will show to the Europeans, hello, did we not make a big mistake? And now would be the time to finally admit it. Even friends can make mistakes. And then see how it will all develop. But I fully understand that Europe doesn't play a role today. And why would it? There was hardly any support. So what plays a role today is the support of the Turkish people for their own nation. And I think this is amazing to see. From a scientist perspective, political analysis, from a personal perspective, being very, very happy over here in Turkey, and from the wider perspective that it sets an example It sets an example for other countries. And I wrote sometimes about it and I said, what would you have done if someone would bomb your own parliament? Would you not have expected your friends come to your rescue, or later on claiming we were on a foreign trip somewhere in the age of internet and 24 hours communication? I think Turkey has set an example. It's a great day today, a sad day, but at the same time looking ahead. And I think what will happen now is that with the new presidential system as well, not talking about this, that's a totally different topic, it must be remembered year in, year out. But I think what will now happen is that the Turkish nation and democracy, and you name it, will be even stronger because the people so decided. No one told them but the people. And this, I've never witnessed anything like this. Selim says, we have not seen anything similar anywhere else. Amazing.
I want to get to our reporter and political analyst, Yusuf Aram, who joins me live from Istanbul. Yusuf, Turkey blames the Fethullah Gulen organization, FETÖ, for orchestrating this failed coup attempt. Where does Turkey stand now with the struggle against FETÖ?
Well, the struggle against FETÖ, especially domestically, the Turkish judicial system and the Turkish police have done a very, very good job of decimating the organization. Now the actual struggle starts because FETÖ has done a very good job of branching out to many different countries. Their new headquarters now in America, especially based in Pennsylvania. So the extradition process and the process to deal with FETÖ in many other countries continues. We've seen a slow change in America's view towards FETÖ. The State Department released a statement a couple weeks ago saying that there are serious investigations going on into the Gülenist organization and Gülen himself. But that remains to be seen how serious. I mean, we haven't seen any statements from the FBI or American security services. We haven't seen any raids on the house. And we haven't seen the Justice Department take any action against top-level Gülenists. Also, globally, we see their schools multiplying, getting bigger, more and more in more different countries. Nigeria is now a very big hotspot. Germany is now their headquarters in Europe. Thailand is becoming a hotbed for FETÖ activity. So it's very, very important that these countries help Turkey in this battle, because what FETÖ is doing in all these countries, they're coming in under the guise of education, but what they're doing is they're establishing a deep financial network, they're establishing an intelligence network, and through education, they're getting to the future leaders of these countries, especially the elites in these countries. We see in many countries like Nigeria and Thailand, top-level bureaucrats' sons attending these schools, and they are all being indoctrinated by Gülen's ideals and ideology. And this is going to hurt Turkey going forward in 10, 20 years if it can't stop it. Now, what Turkey really needs to do is it needs to change its narrative to be able to reach these people and understand, explain its story to these countries and explain FETÖ to these countries. Now, they talk about FETÖ as a terrorist organization, but in these other countries, rather than a terrorist organization, FETÖ more closely resembles the mafia and more closely resembles an intelligence organization. So it needs to be able to explain and understand how these countries can help Turkey and how Turkey can help these countries deal with this problem and this plague that they're going to face in the future.
All right, I want to get back to my studio guests and Selim Atalay. Turkey faced some criticism in the aftermath of the coup attempt and how it handled its response in handling it, as well as in particular holding elections while being under a state of emergency. Do you think that's been fair?
No, absolutely not, because again, Klaus mentioned the European Union attitude from day one. July 15, 2016 was a turning point. It's just, we can just say, the starting point of a new era. So everything was based on that night and aftermath. And since Turkey's quote-unquote friends were not involved during that D-Day, they absolutely, actually, unfortunately, lost their chance to be involved with the future from that starting point. Same thing with the relations with the U.S., same thing with NATO, which the silence of these institutions and key so-called allies have provoked a great deal of reaction from the Turkish people.
All right, Selim Atalay and Klaus Jurgens, thank you both for joining me today.